Your soulmate is saying, I have been waiting months to tell you this. Please listen. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because your soulmate has been carrying something inside for far longer than anyone realizes. Not for a few days. Not for a few weeks. 4 months. Months of thinking. Months of wondering. Months of trying to ignore something that simply refused to disappear. And listen to this. At first, they believed it was just a passing thought. The kind of thought that appears unexpectedly and disappears by morning. The kind of feeling that fades with time. The kind of memory that eventually loses its power. But this didn't happen. Instead, every time they tried to move on, the feeling quietly returned. Every time they convinced themselves it wasn't important, it found its way back into their thoughts. Every time they pushed it aside, it seemed to grow stronger. Because your heart needs this right now, because some truths do not disappear when ignored. They wait. Patiently. Quietly. Until we are ready to face them. Your soulmate was slowly realizing that. And listen to this. The months passed. Life remained busy. Responsibilities demanded attention. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The world kept moving. Yet beneath everything, one thing remained unchanged. The feeling. The thought. The realization. The thing they couldn't seem to forget. And that confused them. Why was it still there? Why had it survived when so many other thoughts disappeared? Why did it still feel important? The questions followed them everywhere. Because your heart needs this right now, because what stays in the heart often carries a lesson. Your soulmate was searching for that lesson. And listen to this. Some nights they would sit quietly and think. Not about work. Not about responsibilities. Not about tomorrow. About this. About the thing they couldn't stop thinking about. And every time they reflected, another piece of understanding appeared. Like a puzzle slowly coming together. Like a story finally making sense. Like a truth gradually revealing itself. The strange thing was that nothing dramatic had happened. No grand event. No shocking revelation. No sudden life-changing moment. Just a feeling that refused to leave. And sometimes those are the strongest feelings of all. Because your heart needs this right now, because the quietest truths are often the most powerful. Your soulmate was discovering that. And listen to this. There were moments when they almost spoke. Moments when they nearly said everything. Moments when the words reached the edge of their lips. But each time, hesitation appeared. Questions appeared. Doubt appeared. Fear appeared. What if I say it wrong? What if I'm misunderstood? What if the timing isn't right? What if I should wait a little longer? So they waited. And waited. And waited. Yet every time they chose silence, something inside them felt unfinished. Because your heart needs this right now, because silence may postpone the truth, but it rarely removes it. Your soulmate was learning that lesson the hard way. And listen to this. One evening, after months of carrying these thoughts, they found themselves sitting alone. The room was quiet. The world outside seemed distant. Everything felt still. And for the first time in a very long while, they stopped running from their own feelings. No distractions. No excuses. No avoidance. Just honesty. Raw honesty. The kind of honesty people rarely show anyone else. The kind of honesty people sometimes struggle to show themselves. And that's when everything began changing. Because your heart needs this right now, because honesty often begins where avoidance ends. Your soulmate had finally stopped avoiding the truth. And listen to this. As they reflected, they realized something important. The thing they had been carrying wasn't becoming smaller with time. It was becoming clearer. That surprised them. For months they assumed time would erase it. Instead, time had sharpened it, strengthened it, clarified it. And suddenly they understood why. Some feelings aren't meant to disappear. Some realizations aren't meant to be forgotten. Some truths are meant to be acknowledged. Because your heart needs this right now, because clarity often arrives slowly before changing everything at once. Your soulmate was approaching that moment of clarity. And listen to this. The more they thought about it, the more emotional they became. Not because they were sad. Not because they were overwhelmed. Because they were tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of carrying everything alone. Tired of having the same conversation inside their head every day. Tired of wondering what would happen if they finally spoke. And for the first time, speaking felt easier than staying silent. That realization shocked them. Because for months silence felt safer. Now honesty felt safer. Because your heart needs this right now, because eventually truth becomes lighter than secrecy. Your soulmate had finally reached that point. And listen to this. As midnight approached, they looked back over the previous months. The doubts. The questions. The hesitation. The fear. The reflection. The growth. Everything suddenly made sense. Every moment had been leading here. Not toward certainty. Toward courage. Because courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to move forward despite fear. And for the first time in months, they felt courageous. Not because they had all the answers. Because they were finally ready to stop hiding from the questions. Because your heart needs this right now, because courage begins the moment truth becomes more important than comfort. Your soulmate was stepping into courage. And listen to this. The room remained quiet. The clock continued ticking. The night continued moving forward. Yet inside, something significant had changed. The waiting was ending. The silence was ending. The hesitation was ending. The truth was finally finding its voice. And as they sat there in the stillness, one thought echoed louder than all the others. I've been carrying this for months. I've been trying to ignore it for months. I've been waiting for the perfect moment for months. But maybe the perfect moment isn't something we find. Maybe it's something we create. That realization changed everything. Because suddenly they weren't waiting anymore. They were preparing. Preparing to finally say what their heart had been carrying all along. Preparing to finally stop hiding. Preparing to finally let the truth exist. Because your heart needs this right now, because freedom often begins with a single honest sentence. Your soulmate was getting ready to speak that sentence. And when they finally do, nothing will feel quite the same again. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after months of silence, your soulmate finally reached a point where keeping everything inside felt harder than facing the truth. For so long, they convinced themselves they could continue waiting. Continue thinking. Continue analyzing. Continue telling themselves that tomorrow would be a better day to speak. Yet tomorrow kept becoming another tomorrow. And another. And another. Until one realization changed everything. And listen to this. The realization arrived quietly. Not during a dramatic moment. Not during an emotional conversation. Not during some life-changing event. It appeared during an ordinary evening. An evening that looked completely normal from the outside. Yet inside, something important was happening. Your soulmate was running out of reasons to stay silent. Because your heart needs this right now, because eventually the truth becomes stronger than the excuses we use to avoid it. Your soulmate was discovering that. And listen to this. For months, they had been carrying the same questions. The same uncertainty. The same endless cycle of overthinking. Every possibility had been examined. Every outcome had been imagined. Every fear had been explored. And strangely enough, all that thinking only led them back to the same place. The truth. No matter how far they wandered mentally, they always returned to it. Like a compass pointing north. Like a river finding its way back to the ocean. Like a lesson refusing to be forgotten. Because your heart needs this right now, because some truths remain persistent for a reason. Your soulmate could no longer ignore that persistence. And listen to this. One night they asked themselves a question. A question they had been avoiding for months. A question so simple that it almost felt unfair. The question was, why am I really afraid? At first, dozens of answers appeared. Fear of rejection. Fear of disappointment. Fear of misunderstanding. Fear of uncertainty. Yet beneath all those fears, another answer appeared. A deeper answer. A more honest answer. They weren't afraid of speaking. They were afraid of vulnerability. Because vulnerability requires honesty. And honesty leaves no place to hide. Because your heart needs this right now, because vulnerability often feels dangerous right before it becomes liberating. Your soulmate was standing on that edge. And listen to this. The realization hit harder than expected. For months, they thought the struggle was about timing. But it wasn't. For months, they thought the struggle was about circumstances. But it wasn't. For months, they thought the struggle was about finding the right words. But it wasn't. The real struggle had always been accepting their own truth. Accepting what they already knew deep down. Accepting what their heart had been trying to tell them all along. And once they saw that, everything began changing. Because your heart needs this right now, because awareness transforms confusion into clarity. Your soulmate was finally seeing clearly. And listen to this. The following days felt different. The thoughts were still there. The emotions were still there. The uncertainty was still there. Yet something important had shifted. They stopped fighting themselves. Instead of arguing with their feelings, they listened to them. Instead of dismissing their thoughts, they explored them. Instead of running from the truth, they sat beside it. And the more they did, the calmer they became. Because your heart needs this right now, because peace often begins when resistance ends. Your soulmate was beginning to feel that peace. And listen to this. Another surprising realization soon followed. They discovered that silence had been costing them more than honesty ever could. Silence had stolen sleep. Silence had stolen energy. Silence had stolen peace of mind. Silence had turned simple thoughts into endless questions. Silence had transformed possibilities into worries. And suddenly they understood something important. The burden wasn't the truth. The burden was carrying it alone. Because your heart needs this right now, because secrets often become heavier than the reality we fear. Your soulmate had finally recognized the weight they were carrying. And listen to this. As the weeks continued, they found themselves reflecting on every lesson life had taught them recently. Lessons about courage. Lessons about trust. Lessons about growth. Lessons about authenticity. And one lesson stood above all the others. The lesson was simple. The things that matter most deserve honesty. No matter how uncomfortable that honesty feels. No matter how uncertain the future appears. No matter how imperfect the timing seems. Because truth matters. And deep down, they knew it always would. Because your heart needs this right now, because meaningful things rarely thrive in silence forever. Your soulmate was learning that lesson every day. And listen to this. One evening, while sitting quietly with their thoughts, they imagined what would happen if they never spoke. If they stayed silent forever. If they continued pretending everything was fine. If they carried the truth for another month. Another year. Another chapter of life. The thought immediately felt wrong. Not because of fear. Because of regret. And suddenly a new question appeared. What would hurt more? Speaking honestly? Or spending years wondering what might have happened if I had? That question changed everything. Because the answer was obvious. The regret of silence felt heavier than the fear of honesty. Because your heart needs this right now, because courage often begins when regret becomes more frightening than uncertainty. Your soulmate had finally reached that moment. And listen to this. The days that followed felt strangely peaceful. Not because every problem disappeared. Not because every question found an answer. Because they had made a decision. A real decision. A final decision. They would stop hiding. They would stop waiting for perfection. They would stop expecting certainty. They would stop demanding guarantees from the future. Instead, they would choose honesty. And that choice brought unexpected relief. Because your heart needs this right now, because decisions often create peace long before outcomes do. Your soulmate was finally feeling that peace. And listen to this. The secret they were terrified to admit no longer felt terrifying. It still felt important. It still felt vulnerable. It still felt emotional. But it no longer felt impossible. Because over the months, something had changed. They had changed. They had become stronger. More self-aware. More honest. More willing to trust themselves. And that growth made all the difference. Because your heart needs this right now, because personal growth quietly prepares us for conversations we once thought we could never have. Your soulmate had been preparing without even realizing it. And listen to this. As another quiet night settled around them, they looked back over the entire journey. The months of silence. The months of reflection. The months of uncertainty. The months of waiting. Everything suddenly seemed connected. Every doubt had taught them something. Every fear had revealed something. Every question had led them closer to understanding. Closer to courage. Closer to truth. And sitting there alone, one final realization settled deeply into their heart. Maybe I wasn't waiting for the right moment. Maybe I was becoming the person capable of facing that moment. The instant that thought appeared, everything made sense. The waiting. The lessons. The growth. The uncertainty. All of it had a purpose. All of it had been preparing them. Preparing them to finally stop hiding. Preparing them to finally speak. Preparing them to finally tell the truth they had been carrying for months. And for the first time in a very long while, they felt ready. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after months of silence, months of reflection, months of questioning themselves, your soulmate finally reached the moment they never thought would arrive. The moment where they stopped asking whether they should speak. And started asking how. And listen to this. For a very long time, they believed they needed certainty before taking action. They believed they needed guarantees. They believed they needed proof that everything would work out perfectly. But life kept teaching them the same lesson. Certainty rarely arrives before courage. More often, courage comes first. And understanding follows later. Because your heart needs this right now, because some doors only open after we take the first step. Your soulmate was finally standing in front of one of those doors. And listen to this. The decision didn't happen during a dramatic moment. There was no sudden sign. No unexpected message. No magical coincidence. It happened during an ordinary evening. A quiet evening. The kind of evening most people would forget. Yet your soulmate would remember it forever. Because something changed inside them. Something important. Something permanent. For the first time in months, they became tired of running from the truth. Because your heart needs this right now, because avoidance eventually becomes more exhausting than honesty. Your soulmate had finally reached that point. And listen to this. They sat alone with their thoughts. No distractions. No noise. No excuses. Just themselves. And the truth. For months, they had treated the truth like a problem. Something to solve. Something to analyze. Something to postpone. Yet suddenly they saw it differently. The truth wasn't a problem. The truth was simply the truth. And maybe it deserved acceptance instead of resistance. That realization changed everything. Because your heart needs this right now, because acceptance often creates peace where struggle once existed. Your soulmate was beginning to feel that peace. And listen to this. As the evening continued, they looked back on the previous months. The endless overthinking. The repeated doubts. The constant uncertainty. The conversations they rehearsed in their mind. The words they almost said. The opportunities they almost took. And one realization became impossible to ignore. Waiting had not brought clarity. Living had brought clarity. Growing had brought clarity. Learning had brought clarity. Time alone hadn't solved anything. The lessons learned during that time had. Because your heart needs this right now, because growth is what transforms confusion into understanding. Your soulmate had been growing the entire time. And listen to this. The fear was still there. That surprised them. For months they assumed courage would arrive only after fear disappeared. But fear hadn't disappeared at all. It was still present. Still whispering questions. Still creating uncertainty. Still reminding them of everything that could go wrong. Yet something else had appeared too. Something stronger. Something quieter. Something steadier. Trust. Trust in themselves. Trust in their growth. Trust in their ability to handle whatever happened next. Because your heart needs this right now, because self-trust often succeeds where confidence fails. Your soulmate had finally learned to trust themselves. And listen to this. Another thought appeared. A thought so simple that it almost made them laugh. The thought was this. I've spent months preparing for a future conversation. But maybe the most important conversation has been the one I've been having with myself. That realization stopped them completely. Because it was true. The real battle had never been external. The real battle had been internal. Learning to be honest. Learning to be vulnerable. Learning to accept what they already knew. Learning to stop hiding from themselves. And now that battle was ending. Because your heart needs this right now, because every meaningful change begins inside before it appears outside. Your soulmate was changing from the inside out. And listen to this. As midnight approached, they noticed something strange. The fear that once felt enormous now felt smaller. Not because it disappeared. Because their courage had grown larger. The same uncertainty existed. The same unknown future existed. The same unanswered questions existed. Yet those things no longer controlled them. For the first time in months, they felt free. Not free from uncertainty. Free from fear's control. And that freedom felt incredible. Because your heart needs this right now, because courage is not the absence of fear, it is freedom from fear's authority. Your soulmate had finally discovered that freedom. And listen to this. Then came the exact moment everything changed. The exact moment they made their decision. The exact moment they stopped waiting. It happened when they asked themselves one final question. If I knew everything would remain uncertain no matter what I choose, what would I do? The answer arrived immediately. Without hesitation. Without confusion. Without doubt. They would speak. They would be honest. They would stop hiding. They would stop waiting. And suddenly the decision felt obvious. Because your heart needs this right now, because clarity often arrives when we stop asking what feels safe and start asking what feels true. Your soulmate had finally chosen truth. And listen to this. For the first time in months, they slept peacefully. Not because every problem was solved. Not because every answer had appeared. Because the internal conflict was ending. The decision had been made. The waiting was over. The truth would no longer remain trapped inside their heart. And that knowledge created calm. Real calm. The kind of calm that comes from alignment. When your thoughts, your heart, and your actions finally agree with each other. Because your heart needs this right now, because peace often arrives when we stop fighting ourselves. Your soulmate had finally stopped fighting. And listen to this. The following morning felt different. The sun rose exactly as it always did. The world looked exactly the same. The responsibilities were still there. Life continued normally. Yet everything felt different. Because they were different. Stronger. Clearer. More honest. More prepared. More connected to themselves than they had been in a very long time. And that inner transformation mattered more than they realized. Because your heart needs this right now, because the biggest changes are often invisible to everyone except the person experiencing them. Your soulmate was experiencing one of those changes. And listen to this. As the day moved forward, they felt gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons. Gratitude for the growth. Gratitude for the months that once felt frustrating. Because now they understood something important. Those months were not wasted. Those months were preparation. Preparation for courage. Preparation for honesty. Preparation for this exact moment. And suddenly every delay made sense. Every question made sense. Every lesson made sense. Because your heart needs this right now, because understanding often arrives only after the journey is complete. Your soulmate had finally reached understanding. And listen to this. Before the day ended, one final realization settled deeply into their heart. A realization they would never forget. It was this: I thought I was waiting for the perfect time. But the truth is, I was becoming the person capable of telling the truth. The waiting wasn't punishment. The waiting was preparation. The growth wasn't accidental. The growth was necessary. And now, for the first time in months, I'm finally ready. The moment that realization arrived, everything felt lighter. The fear softened. The doubt faded. The future opened. And your soulmate knew that the next chapter was about to begin. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after months of silence, months of reflection, months of hesitation, and months of gathering the courage to finally speak, your soulmate has reached the moment they have been preparing for all along. The moment where the waiting ends. The moment where the silence breaks. The moment where honesty finally steps into the light. And listen to this. For so long, they imagined what this moment would feel like. They imagined every possible outcome. Every possible reaction. Every possible scenario. They replayed conversations in their mind. They rehearsed words that were never spoken. They created entire stories about what might happen once the truth finally left their heart. Yet when the moment finally arrived, something surprising happened. It felt simpler than expected. Not easier. Just simpler. Because your heart needs this right now, because truth often feels complicated before it is spoken and surprisingly clear after it is spoken. Your soulmate was beginning to understand that. And listen to this. The months leading to this moment had taught them many things. Patience. Reflection. Self-awareness. Courage. But perhaps the most important lesson was this. The things we avoid often teach us the most. Every time they tried to escape the truth followed. Every time they ignored it, it returned. Every time they postponed it, it waited patiently. Never leaving. Never disappearing. Never fading away. Because your heart needs this right now, because some truths are meant to transform us, not leave us. Your soulmate had been transformed by this journey. And listen to this. As they sat quietly, preparing themselves to finally speak, they noticed something different. The fear that once dominated every thought was no longer in control. It was still present. Still whispering. Still reminding them of uncertainty. But it no longer had power. Because something stronger had taken its place. Understanding. The understanding that honesty is not about controlling outcomes. It is about respecting the truth. And once they understood that, everything changed. Because your heart needs this right now, because peace often begins when we stop trying to control what happens next. Your soulmate had finally found that peace. And listen to this. The truth they had been carrying for months wasn't hidden because it was dramatic. It wasn't hidden because it was dangerous. It wasn't hidden because it would shock the world. It was hidden because it mattered. And things that matter often require courage. The more important something becomes, the harder it can feel to express. Not because the words are difficult. Because the vulnerability is real. Because your heart needs this right now, because vulnerability is often the price we pay for authenticity. Your soulmate was finally willing to pay that price. And listen to this. As the moment arrived, they took a deep breath. The same breath they had imagined taking hundreds of times before. The same breath they had postponed for months. The same breath that stood between silence and honesty. And then they finally spoke. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. Not with a rehearsed speech. Just honestly. Because honesty was enough. And for the first time in months, they felt completely genuine. Completely real. Completely free. Because your heart needs this right now, because authenticity creates a freedom that pretending never can. Your soulmate was finally experiencing that freedom. And listen to this. The strange thing wasn't what happened after they spoke. The strange thing was what happened inside them. The weight disappeared. The pressure softened. The endless overthinking stopped. The exhausting cycle of imagining every possibility finally ended. Not because every answer appeared. Because they no longer needed every answer. The truth had been spoken. And that alone created relief. Because your heart needs this right now, because closure often begins the moment honesty enters the conversation. Your soulmate had finally created that closure. And listen to this. As they reflected on everything they had learned, another realization appeared. The months of waiting had not been pointless. The uncertainty had not been pointless. The fear had not been pointless. Every part of the journey had contributed something valuable. Every challenge had built courage. Every question had created understanding. Every moment of hesitation had revealed something important. And suddenly they felt grateful. Grateful for the process. Grateful for the lessons. Grateful for the growth. Because your heart needs this right now, because even difficult journeys often contain hidden gifts. Your soulmate had discovered those gifts. And listen to this. The more they thought about it, the more they understood something remarkable. The greatest transformation wasn't the truth they finally shared. The greatest transformation was the person they became while learning to share it. The stronger version of themselves. The more honest version of themselves. The more courageous version of themselves. The more self-aware version of themselves. That was the real achievement. Because your heart needs this right now, because becoming someone new is often more important than reaching a destination. Your soulmate had become someone new. And listen to this. As the evening grew quiet, they reflected on the entire journey one final time. The months of waiting. The months of reflection. The months of uncertainty. The months of growth. Everything suddenly felt meaningful. Everything suddenly felt connected. Everything suddenly felt necessary. Even the difficult parts. Especially the difficult parts. Because those were the parts that taught the deepest lessons. Because your heart needs this right now, because the lessons that change us most are rarely the easiest lessons. Your soulmate had learned many of those lessons. And listen to this. One final realization settled deeply into their heart. A realization they knew they would carry for a very long time. It was this. The truth I was afraid to share wasn't the thing holding me back. The fear of sharing it was. And once I faced that fear, everything became lighter. Everything became clearer. Everything became more peaceful. The moment they accepted that truth, they smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that comes from relief. The kind that comes from freedom. The kind that comes from finally being honest with yourself and the world around you. Because your heart needs this right now, because freedom often begins with a single act of courage. Your soulmate had finally found that freedom. And listen to this. Before the night ended, one final thought echoed quietly through their mind. I spent months waiting for the perfect moment. But the perfect moment was never the point. The point was becoming brave enough to speak when the moment arrived. And now that I have, I finally feel at peace. And with that realization, the journey that began with silence finally came to an end.